Hello, my friends, and welcome back to yet another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Gouveia. I am a criminal defense attorney here at the R&R Law Group in the always beautiful and sunny Scottsdale, Arizona. And today we're talking about Russia, Ukraine, Biden, America, even talking about Poland and Romania, and some other new locations where American troops are going to be jettisoned. We have Pentagon Spokesperson John Kirby, who is going to be detailing what is happening, because there was a big announcement today, 3,000 new American troops heading on over to Germany and other parts of Eastern Europe. And we're going to break down exactly what's happening because the DOD is out and they're telling us what's going to happen. And this may be ringing the bell for a lot of people, sort of a deja vu moment, because we remember when they were moving troops around last time, didn't work out too well for America or for those troops, unfortunately. And so many people are sort of drawing parallels and analogies between what we're seeing happen here out of Eastern Europe and what we saw happen last year, about August, in Afghanistan. And so John Kirby is going to detail for us how the new movements are going to be facilitating our NATO allies. We're going to hear that a lot. NATO allies, NATO allies, NATO allies. And then we're going to hear Jen Psaki come out and say the same thing, NATO allies, and really talking about how much America is needed to help sort of calm this situation. And we're going to hear from another senator, somebody named Josh Hawley. Josh Hawley came out and said, you know what, America, maybe it's time that we just say, let Ukraine be on their own. You know, stop letting them, or stop demanding that they join NATO, because that right there, says Hawley, is what the crux of this issue is all about. And so he pens this letter over to the DOD, actually to the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, and then Jen Psaki's not happy about this email or about this letter. And so we're going to hear a lot from her several times today. And then in our second segment, we're going to change gears. We're going to talk about what Putin has to say about this whole situation, because we've been hearing from a lot of American spokespeople for a long time here. We've, on this very channel, talked about and listened to Kirby. We listened to Milley. We also listened to last week Austin. We've heard a lot of Blinken. We've even listened to Ned Price. And I know that's a tall thing to ask of people here, but we listened to all of them. And so now we're going to change gears and listen to what Putin has to say about this, and sort of put the hat on the other person and say, well, maybe let's listen to what his sort of what take is on this thing. And we'll sort of compare it to what historically has happened with NATO and see if maybe he has a point, and ask ourselves why this administration and many people on both sides of the aisle keep beating the drums of war regardless of anything else that flies in their face. So we're going to talk about that and listen actually into Putin. I'm going to do some translating on the fly, reading really, and we're going to analyze what's happening there. And then in our last segment, we're just going to remember that regardless of what happens here with Russia, Ukraine, at least we can all rest assured that we've got competent leadership in charge. And just to confirm that competent leadership, we're going to check back in with some new documents that came out, leaked actually, from the U.S. government. The details of a meeting they had back on August 14, 2021. You might remember that was basically the day before, 2 days before, Kabul fell, captured by the Taliban. And so we get to see basically what the entire inner structure of the U.S. government was saying, what they were talking about, or let's say not talking about, right back in the thick of the Afghanistan debacle. And then we can sort of rest assured that this same level of competence and expertise is going to be useful in our next global entanglement. And so, my goodness, we've got just a ton to get to. And if you want to be a part of the show, the place to do that is over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. They're chatting away over there. I see B Spec, Radicy. We have Russell Warren there. I saw Paula MK's here. We have Jeremy Matrita, Kelly Selnow, George Klaus is there. I was looking for George. There he is. I'm Not Gas, and many others. We're also live on Rumble, as well as over on YouTube. We're taking questions from our locals chat thread. And also, got a big update. We've got a new Jen Psaki GIF now. So Jen Psaki, if you're a member on YouTube, then you can use these GIFs in your various postings on the chat, or in, I think, on the comments. And so we're now up to 8. And every time we get more members, we get to add more GIFs. And so we just added Jen. We get to add one more And then as you can see, if we add 10 more members, we get up to 10 emojis. And so YouTube like literally gamifies this. Like they know what they're doing. They want me to come out here and shill memberships so that I can get more emojis on this channel so we can all sort of, goof around. They know what they're doing. And so I'm going to do it. I'm going to come out here and shill the membership thing so we can get some more emojis because I happen to like emojis. All right. And so you can also get badges that just show that you've been a supporter for a long period of time. And these badges will sort of tier up the longer you're a supporter. And of course, I appreciate that. The way to join is by clicking this button right here. Join right next to the subscribe button. And of course, I very much appreciate it. Having fun with it. So thanks for joining up. All right. And let's get into it, shall we? Joe Biden, the Pentagon, John Kirby, Lloyd Austin, and basically the entire U.S. government is still shifting into war footing mode. We're now learning that 3,000 additional troops are not going to be over there to be in an offensive capacity or anything, but the U.S. is picking up 3,000 additional troops in addition to the 8,500 that were on a hot standby. And they're going to be sending them over to support our NATO allies. And we're sort of a little bit skeptical when this current administration starts moving things around militarily speaking. We're going to do a lot of sort of compare and contrast in this segment. But let's start off right at the top. What does John Kirby have for us? He's going to be announcing this in front of the Pentagon from Washington today.
President Biden has been clear that the United States will respond to the growing threat to Europe's security and stability. Our commitment to NATO, Article 5, and collective defense remains ironclad. As part of this commitment, and to be prepared for a range of contingencies, the United States will soon move additional forces to Romania, Poland, and Germany.
3 countries.
I want to be very clear about something.
Tell us, John.
These are not permanent moves.
Okay.
They are moves designed to respond to the current security environment. Moreover, these forces are not going to fight in Ukraine. They're going to ensure the robust defense of our NATO allies.
All right, so we're going to hear that.
Now let me
just beaten to the ground, NATO allies, NATO allies, NATO allies. And so you probably saw some of these headlines, right? They were splashed all over the place this morning. U.S. is ordering, according to the Wall Street Journal and others, 3,000 additional troops to bolster European allies. And so the military standoff continues. We've been doing this for some time now. Biden sending approximately 2,000 troops from Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Okay, these are men and women in the armed forces. Got to pick up, go over there to Poland or Germany, and they're repositioning another 1,000 troops, and their families are all implicated here, that are a part of a Germany-based infantry striker squadron to Romania. So we got Poland, Germany, and Romania. This is going to shore up the NATO eastern flank, and we're going to take a look at the maps here in detail. In addition, the Pentagon expects other moves of forces inside of Europe. Currently, there's 8,500 troops on a hot standby, given similar orders last week. And so you're going, okay, it's only 3,000 troops, or, I don't know, maybe you're not thinking that. I don't know what you're thinking. But there's a lot of people, myself, I should just talk about myself here, that were remembering headlines from, 6 months ago that looked a lot like this. I was thinking 3,000 troops. Haven't we heard that before? And so I went back to my slides, since we talked about, I've got slides, up the wazoo. And so I just went back and I said, what happened in August last year? Pulled out some slides, and lo and behold, we had this one. The Daily Mail says the Pentagon sends 3,000 troops. Oh, remember, that's a convenient number. But where are these troops going? They're going back to Afghanistan, because it was a disaster. And what are they doing there? Well, they're going to evacuate Americans. And, they totally botched this whole situation. And so the State Department kind of wrecked everything, right? State Department last week warned U.S. citizens to get out. And so you're going, oh, okay. Great. Last time you sort of were moving 3,000 troops around, didn't work out too well. And so some people are connecting those dots. Now let's take a look at the map, right? We know that Kirby is making some pretty serious announcements here. And so let's get our bearings straight. He says, first and foremost, we've got Ukraine here. And this is kind of the centerpiece of where all of this activity is centered around. And it's kind of hard to define the border, but of course, Russia and Moscow are over in this area. And so you can't see very clear borders, but you can see sort of the countries are being named here. And so according to John Kirby, we've got Romania is where we've got some new troop deployments going to be taking place. And I think they're coming over from Fort Bragg. We've got Poland, and then we've got Germany. And so you can see sort of what's happening here. If this is the Ukraine border, where is my cursor? If this is Ukraine here, more or less, roughly this area, this border, and this is sort of the contested area, right? This is all going to be sort of the contested zone. And right now, it's like a game of Risk, right? Literally, what Joe Biden and the administration doing are they're just moving their pieces around. So they're shoring up this border with Poland. They're shoring up this border with Romania because they know that if Russia crosses this barrier into Ukraine, they're trying to build a firewall here. And so that's exactly what's happening. And so they're deploying some additional troops over to Germany to sort of buttress them back up. And so some people are in the chat. They're saying, hey, yeah, just rewind the clock back to World War I, World War II. It kind of looks, familiar here. And so we can see now that what Putin is concerned about, he's over in Moscow, and he's got some sort of, interest in this part of the world. And so you can just see how, Ukraine is now going to be the contested zone. And we're also going to see that Putin is meeting with other people in Eastern Europe, right? He's sort of trying to sort of win, his contingent here. And so the map is filling up. And previously, last week, we talked about the OS Intel stuff, open source Intel that we saw, ships from Russia that were being sort of ferried around this side up into the Black Sea. And it's getting tense. So that's what Kirby's talking about. These are going to be the 3 new deployments. Here is how it's all going to work according to the Pentagon.
Now let me lay this out for you in a series of 3 steps. First, 1,000 soldiers that are currently based in Germany will reposition to Romania in the coming days. Now, this is a Stryker squadron, a mounted cavalry unit that's designed to deploy in short order and to move quickly once in place. And they will augment the some 900 U.S. forces that are currently in Romania. Now, this force is designed to deter aggression and enhance our defensive capabilities in frontline allied states. And we expect them, as I said, to move in coming days.
All right. So we hear what he's saying, right? They're being moved. They're totally not aggressive. They're just there to support our allies. And we've heard this language. I was sort of critical about this last week, saying it's kind of a weird strategy for the administration to come out and talk like a big, loud, scary, barking dog. And they did that, right? Kamala did it. Biden did it. Biden sort of like screwed it up during his press conference and then had to walk that back. He's like, well, minor incursions are okay. What I meant, though, is I will nuke you to oblivion if you even look at us wrong, right? So he's sort of straddling this line a number of different ways. And then, they're being really aggressive. And then they say, well, we're not really doing anything, though. It's 8,500 troops, only 3,000. It's only in support capacity. We have really no offensive capabilities. They're only there to support our allies. In other words, kind of telling Russia, like, well, we're not really going to do much about any of this. Meanwhile, as we compared and contrast last week, we heard from Lloyd Austin and from General Milley in their own briefings saying, hey, we are so outnumbered here, it's not even close. I mean, they didn't say that, but they said that. We went through it piece by piece. They said, oh, well, Putin's, he's got a lot of options. That's how they said it, right? That's how they're screwed. Well, what options does Putin have? Well, anything he wants. He has 100,000 troops there. He's got land, air, sea, everything. Whatever, he's got it all there, so he can do whatever he wants. And speaking of that, the Russians are now showing the world this. And so they've got some war propaganda pieces out that are fun. I mean, who doesn't like to watch these things? But ABC News, I noticed this morning, and I'm curious. I didn't clip this to show you evidence of this, but I noticed this, that on Twitter, there were a lot of these going around. Reuters had this. I think AP had this, or different versions of this. ABC News, as you're going to see, has a version of this. Just all sorts of just war war prawn all over the place. And you can see sort of this is an example of this. ABC was very excited about this. They posted it on Twitter along with many of the others. And this comes right out of Russia. Military drills amid Ukraine tension, right? And so this is Russian footage. You can see the tanks. Ministry of Defense released a video of Russian and Belarusian tanks taking part in joint drills. Russian Ministry of Defense released a video. You can see the inside of that. Joint drills. And so it seems like Is it just a show of force? I mean, is that all it is? The drills took place against the backdrop of a troop buildup near Ukraine has put the West on edge. Is it all just for show? Maybe, I don't know. Russia is demanding that Ukraine be permanently barred from ever joining NATO. This is according to ABC News. And some nice looking tanks out there. All right, there you go. NATO said demands are unacceptable. Alliance does not threaten Russia. So you can see some heavy artillery, right? Moving on in there. And so that's sort of what presumably the military is seeing, something, you know, more or less like that. And so that's sort of how the U.S. is responding, right? 3,000 troops versus that. And I don't know if, you know, if the capabilities or, you know, match up, if one is relevant to the other. I don't really know. But we talked about this last week. It's the idea that there's a disconnect here, that they're talking a big, tough game, barking really loudly, but they really don't have any bite behind it. Everything that they're saying says that we're going to go, we mean serious business. We're the United States. Don't play around here. But are the behind the scenes maneuvers consequential at all? I don't know. Here is what Kirby tells us is going to be happening with the individuals, the troops, the American men and women going over to Ukraine or Romania or Poland or wherever.
Now let me lay this out for you in a series of 3 steps.
Tell us.
First, 1,000 soldiers that are currently based in Germany will reposition to Romania in the coming days. Now, this is a Stryker
Germany
squadron
to Romania,
a mounted cavalry unit that's designed to deploy in short order and to move quickly once in place. And they will augment the some 900 U.S. forces that are currently in Romania. Now, this force is designed to deter aggression and enhance our defensive capabilities in frontline allied states. And we expect them, as I said, to move in coming days.
Okay, so you can see, right, just moving a couple pieces around, and not real consequential, 900 people there, 900 soldiers, 1,000 soldiers moving all over the place. And then he's finally going to tell us, but they're basically not offensive, right? We're just there to assist. Let's confirm this from John.
Finally. All of these forces are separate and in addition to the 8,500 personnel in the United States on heightened alert posture that I announced last week.
Wait, what are they going to do over there?
8,500 are not currently being deployed, but remain ready to move if called for the NATO response force, or as needed for other contingencies as directed by the Secretary or by President Biden. We continue to review our force posture and the situation in Europe, and we will make adjustments as the situation warrants.
All right.
All
right, so basically nothing, right? 3,000 moving around, 900 from Germany going over to Romania. Some others are going back into Germany to fill the void of the other troops that have left. And so just kind of shuffling pieces around. The 8,500 that were put on alert, they're still on alert. They're not being deployed. And he's going to tell us that they appreciate that other countries are joining in. This is our last clip from Kirby. Then we're going to see what Psaki has to say about it.
And we welcome the additional announcements by Spain, Denmark, the UK, and the Netherlands.
Additional announcements.
Consideration to deploy additional forces to reinforce NATO's eastern flank. The United States has robust capabilities distributed across Europe, including in the Baltic region, and we will continue to assess needs in that area.
All right. So I don't know if you caught that. I didn't preface it so that you could catch it. But he said specifically, we're very pleased to learn of conversations about our allies to determine whether or not they have intentions to possibly maybe also send some additional troops. We're happy about the idea that we are talking about putting a calendar date in writing. Great. So Jen Psaki now comes back out. And now people are asking this very obvious question. Hey, Jen, what prompted this change? You know, last week, things seemed like they were pretty well under control. You guys said that you're, encouraged about diplomacy and blah, blah, blah. But why now are you mobilizing? Like, did you see something? Did Pootie Poo do something that caught you all by surprise and now you're having to reallocate resources? Or what prompted the sudden reallocation of troops? And now these aren't just 8,500 troops that are on high alert. These are going to be ready to be deployed. These are actually being deployed, right? These troops are actually going overseas. Here is that question to Jen, and here's what she had to say about it. And Zulu is already in the chat with the Jen Psaki circle back gif. Love it. Here is Jen. Celebrate it.
Some new piece of information or intelligence that he saw in the last few days that sort of went from being a notional thing to something that to an actual deployment.
I would not read this as a decision made based on any events over the last 48 hours or couple of days. We've been in discussion and under discussion with our partners and allies in the region where these troops are going for several weeks now. And I would just outline for you, I know some of you may have watched John Kirby's briefing, but just to give some more specifics, the 1,000 service members from the U.S. Army's 2nd Cavalry Regiment, which is based in Germany, will reposition to Romania in the coming days. Secretary Austin had discussed this possibility and this deployment to Romania last week in his conversation with the Romanian defense minister. Second, we are moving 1,700 service members from Fort Bragg to Poland and approximately 300 service members from Fort Bragg to Germany. Both of these moves are to supplement existing U.S. force presence in Poland and Germany. These forces are separate and in addition to the 8,500 personnel in the United States on heightened alert position posture that we announced last week. But I would also note, Zeke, just to finish answering your question, that the president has been clear since the beginning of the escalation and the building of troops at the border, and been directly clear with President Putin, as he was in early December. If Russia stays on an escalatory path, which they clearly have, they will make force posture adjustments to deter and defend against any aggression.
All right, so she says, right, we've been very clear about this. Putin continues to escalate, so we're continuing to escalate. If he's going to be sending these people over, his people over to their border, we can do the same thing. And I actually heard this earlier today. I think, who said this? Was it Jen or was it Kirby? It might have been Kirby. I'm not sure who it was, but remember last week we talked about the Russians, and people were asking them specifically about this. They're saying, hey guys, why are you moving all of your troops over here so close to Ukraine? And they said, hey, it's our side of the bed, all right? We can do whatever we want over here. Don't you even think about encroaching on this area. It's our troops. It's our land. Mind your business is basically what they said. And now the U.S. is kind of using that same line, which is a good line, right? And they're saying that also. Hey, it's NATO. We are an alliance, and we can actually make decisions. And so they're starting to do the same thing. And so another reporter now asks Jen, they say, Jen, 3,000 more troops over there. You just pulled, a bunch of troops out of Afghanistan. Are we getting involved in this again? And then they ask, are they coming home? Are you going to bring those troops home? Yes or no? And here's what Jen says.
You touched on it's not permanent. They're not intended to be permanent. And again, we already had troop presence in all of these countries where we are doing an increase in troops. So I can't give you an evaluation. Obviously, if Russia decides to de-escalate, to take de-escalatory steps, then certainly that
they'll
will
come
impact,
home.
what the force posture needs are in other parts of the region.
Senator
All right,
Hawley,
so
was at the statement today.
We're going to consider it on a case-by-case basis. And then now they're talking about, I think this is our last clip from Psaki, and then we're going to go into Hawley. Now, Josh Hawley is now sort of saying that, all of this has to be undone. Let's see what Jen says here. Yeah, sacred obligations, NATO allies, right? It's like a broken record.
What they will be doing there, and also about the distribution to these specific countries, why these 3 places, and why the 2,000 versus 1,000.
Sure. Well, to be clear, they're not going to Ukraine to fight, right?
Got it.
So
Yeah, we
I
got
know that's
that.
what you were asking, but just for clarity for the transcript purposes. Our effort and our objective here has been to ensure we are ready for every contingency. And force posture increases as part of that preparedness. It's to reassure our allies, to whom, as I've said, we have a sacred obligation. This force, or these forces who have gone, are trained and equipped for a variety of missions to deter aggression and to reassure and defend our allies. In terms of specific numbers, I'd really point you to the Department of Defense, who makes the recommendations and ultimately, proposes for the president's sign-off. I would note that a number of our NATO allies have recently announced troop movements as well.
NATO allies.
To what was announced this morning. So, including the United Kingdom, France, Spain, Denmark, and the Netherlands, of their intent to deploy additional forces to reinforce NATO's eastern flank as well. So, this is a reflection of our robust capabilities and our ability to distribute them across Europe, but it's also consistent with what a lot of our NATO partners are doing.
Okay, so NATO allies, NATO partners, everybody's intending to do a bunch of stuff. Meanwhile, Putin's just filling up the border. So we'll see how it works out for him. Now, we also have Josh Hawley. Josh Hawley is a Republican senator from Missouri, if I'm not mistaken. And here, he's sort of kind of going against the grain of many of the neocons, right? The people who just want endless war, the people, which is basically I think both parties now are essentially endless war parties. But Josh Hawley's he's a clever fella. He's kind of going against the grain on this one. He's saying, look, Biden, United States, we got to cut it out with this NATO stuff because the real threat here is not really Russia, it's China. We've got a whole bigger fish to fry over here. And so if we get caught up in sort of a dual front war, doesn't work out real well. There's historical evidence to support that. So Axios is reporting, and we've got a letter from Hawley that we're going to go through. But Hawley here is now calling on the Biden administration to just drop support for Ukraine membership in NATO. Just stop it. We don't even need to talk about it anymore. He's saying that he is now sort of staking out a position that is increasingly, popular these days. And let's just get into the letter. And so here he wrote this back on yesterday, February 1, 2022. And so Josh Hawley here is sending this over to Anthony Blinken, honorable, from the Department of State. He's the Secretary of State. He says, I write to request clarity about Biden administration support for Ukraine's prospective membership in NATO. Why do you support it? He talks about Article 10, says it stipulates so-and-so, says that expansion can only occur by unanimous agreement, and that only, quote, a European state in position to further the principles of this treaty may receive an invitation. The United States has supported multiple rounds of this, and it has been expanded. The United States also signaled support for further enlargement, including to Ukraine. As the United States and its allies declared in 2008, NATO welcomes Ukraine. And he says, we agreed today that these countries will become members of NATO. And he says, you testified to this effect before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee in 2021. Blinken, when you said this, Blinken, we support Ukraine membership in NATO. So he says, yet it's not clear that Ukraine's accession would serve U.S. interests. Indeed, deteriorating conditions in global security caution otherwise. So he's saying right here, Mr. Blinken, you have been screaming for a long time that you want Ukraine in NATO. Got it. Couple examples of this. Bucharest summit, U.S. said that, its allies said that. You said it recently, just last year. And so we need clarity because what sounded like it was a good position originally, it's not so good now. Just look around the world. He says the world of 2008, in fact, is gone. Today, an increasingly powerful China seeks hegemony in the Indo-Pacific, meaning they want to take control of that whole theater of the globe. If China succeeds, it could harness that region's resources to further propel its rise while restricting U.S. access to many important markets. If they control the Indo-Pacific, guess who doesn't? The U.S. American security and prosperity rest upon our ability to keep that from happening. And so the United States must shift resources to the Indo-Pacific to deny China's bid for regional domination. This means the U.S. can no longer carry the heavy burden it did for other regions in the world, including Europe. To the contrary, we must do less in those secondary theaters in order to prioritize denying China hegemonic ambitions in the Indo-Pacific. We're spending too much time over here in Europe. All of our NATO allies have been grifting off of the U.S. taxpayer for far too long. Trump made that same argument, and he said, we got to reorient this thing and focus it over onto China. Hawley's in agreement. And so he writes to Secretary Blinken, he says, this administration's support for Ukraine's membership in NATO, it defies these realities. The United States has an interest in maintaining Ukraine's independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity, and we should urgently deliver to Ukraine assistance it needs to defend itself against the Russian military and other threats. But our interest is not so strong, however, as to justify committing the United States to go to war with Russia over Ukraine's fate. It says, rather, we must aid Ukraine in a manner that aligns with American interests at stake and preserves our ability to deny Chinese hegemony in the Indo-Pacific. Concerns about NATO enlargement might be lessened if our European allies were shouldering their fair share of the burden of our collective defense. Were they doing so, then it might not be so difficult to admit new members without jeopardizing America's ability to keep its focus on the Indo-Pacific. But that is not the case. In fact, it's quite the opposite. He says in 2006, NATO allies agreed to spend at least 2% of national GDP on defense. They reaffirmed this commitment 8 years later in 2014, but today, more than 15 years since the initial spending agreement, only 19 of them have met their commitment. As U.S. Ambassador to NATO says, Julianne Smith, she said 19 allies out of 30 are not enough. But this is an understatement. It also belies the fact that NATO's 2% spending goal was adopted in a world that no longer exists. The world has grown far more dangerous since 2006. 2% is no longer a sufficient minimum for allied defense spending. Put differently, that pledge that we took back then, it's obsolete. For NATO to even remain viable, Hawley writes, especially as the United States shifts resources over to the Indo-Pacific, our European allies must increase defense spending above 2% of GDP. Telling that to Secretary of State Blinken, right? He's the Secretary of State. Go over there and advocate for America's interest and tell him we got to increase the spending because we've got bigger fish to fry. He says, Blinken, look, finally, some argue that now is not the right time to ask hard questions about Ukraine's membership in NATO, but I submit that now is exactly the right time for confronting hard truths. Russia's buildup on Ukraine's border makes apparent just how important it is for the U.S. to be deliberate about how it makes commitments abroad. Already, Biden announced that the United States will send more conventional forces to Europe if Russia invades Ukraine. Such a deployment can only detract from the U.S. military and their ability to modernize their forces and deter China. These are opportunity costs, and they pale in comparison to what would be expected, indeed required, of the United States were NATO actually to admit Ukraine as a member. Which is a great point. What happens if they do ultimately admit Ukraine? Right now, Russia is very concerned. Does that automatically just mean we're in a war? Like, is that how this goes, right? The future prognostication is that's just what happens. China's rise, Hawley writes, has collapsed basic assumptions in U.S. foreign policy. The legacy of a bygone era, the Biden administration's support for Ukraine's prospective membership in NATO demands scrutiny. Therefore, I've got some questions for you, and I'd like some answers by February 28th. Here's some of the questions. Secretary Blinken, question number one for you, sir. How would Ukraine's admission to NATO contribute to the security of the North Atlantic area? How would it help? And I want to know specifically how it would help given Ukraine's vulnerability to Russian invasion. Okay, so if now, right, it's sort of saying, hey, you know, this is a really hot potato. The Ukraine. If we say you're in NATO now, and anything happens on that border with Russia, now it's NATO versus Russia, right? That's a big, big meatball. Number two, Mr. Blinken, do you believe Ukraine's admission to NATO would improve U.S. national security sufficiently to justify the United States committing itself to fight Russia over Ukraine now or in the foreseeable future? In other words, do the benefits of admitting Ukraine outweigh the potential harms? And what are those benefits? Still has yet to be explained to me. Number three, were Ukraine to be admitted to the alliance, would you be concerned about the United States' ability to defend Ukraine against Russia? That's a good question. He says while simultaneously deterring the Chinese, but I mean, it's a good question in general. What's NATO going to do about it? Look, I'm not a military analyst, but I would put myself on par with the current DOD leadership, though. Everybody, really. I think anybody could have thrown a dart at a dartboard and had a better outcome in Afghanistan. But all right. So a good question. You know, what are they going to do? Are they really going to stand up and go toe-to-toe with Russia? He wants to know. Do you commit to and ask for and receive the Secretary of Defense's certification that the U.S. can do two things? Number one, represent and fight on behalf of Ukraine, and also deter and defeat Chinese aggression. Can you do both those things at the same time? Because it sounds like a lot. Need to know. Also, Mr. Blinken, number 5, do you agree that NATO's allies' failure to spend more than 2% of their own defense limits other countries' abilities, particularly the United States, to focus on China? And number 6, do you agree that it would be prudent for the United States to wait until NATO allies, including Germany, are spending more than 2% before we jump in and fight for Ukraine. Let me know. Thank you for your attention to this important matter. Signed, sincerely, Josh Hawley, United States Senator. And so that's going over to the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, and he's going to say, number one, sacred duty to our allies. Number two, NATO. Number three, sacred duty to our allies. Here's what Jen Psaki has to say about all of this. Very unhappy with Hawley. That might have been Russian propaganda. Here's what Psaki says about Hawley.
Region.
Senator Hawley was at the statement today saying that the president should sort of take NATO membership off the table for Ukraine, and that wasn't in U.S. interest to do that. Do you think that sort of rhetoric or sort of position by a U.S. senator right now is helpful in this showdown between the West and Russia?
Well, if you are just digesting Russian misinformation and parroting Russian talking points, you are not aligned with long-standing bipartisan American values, which is to stand up for the sovereignty of countries like Ukraine, but others, their right to choose their own alliances, and also to stand against, very clearly, the efforts or attempts or potential attempts by any country to invade and take territory of another country. That applies to Senator Hawley, but it also applies to others who may be parroting the talking points of Russian propagandist leaders.
Parroting the talking points of Russian propagandist leaders, and anybody who does that is just out of alignment with true American values. Which is why we're going to listen to Vladimir Putin right now and go through it and talk about exactly what he's saying from his perspective. And we'll see what Psaki has to say about that. Reuters is reporting that Russian President Vladimir Putin accused the U.S. of its allies of ignoring Russian security concerns. And this is the first time that he's spoken directly on this issue in quite some time. He says that what they're trying to do is create a scenario designed to lure Russia into war. And so this is him speaking. Now let's take a listen and see what he says. It's going to be in Russian. I'm going to read the transcript down there at the bottom, and we'll see how this works out. As you know, he says, we have been promised by NATO that it will not advance its infrastructure 1 inch further eastwards. Everybody knows that. Today, we see where NATO is. Poland, Romania, the Baltic states. He says, they said one thing and they did another. And the people say, they played us, simply lied. Okay, that's fine. They lied. No big deal. Then the U.S. withdrew from the Missile Defense Treaty. We tried to talk them out of it for a long time. This is one of the foundational treaties for ensuring security in the world. Nevertheless, the U.S. did what they did, and they withdrew. And now, here's where we're at. And so, you start to say, well, that's interesting. It's a pretty big statement, that the U.S. is sort of, encroaching upon them, and that they promised one thing and they did another, right, is what he was saying. And so you just poke around the internet and you can find a lot of different graphs that sort of look like this. You can see how NATO expanded eastwards. And so you can just see, right, 1949, you see the original NATO countries are all in this dark blue or black or whatever it shows up on your screen. And then we get a little bit of a lighter blue from 1952 to 1982. And that's going to be these countries. We're going to dive into them here in a little bit. And you can see it just expands. By 1999, we're moving significantly east. And then by 2017 and 2020, it's all these additional blue states, these very light blue states. And the current aspirations to join, you can see here is Ukraine, right? And so they're right there. And so you can see Russia is this chunk of land here, and they're not too happy about this. You can see here's another graph, a who's who of member states. And Russia is right here. You can see this. I'm going to outline this border, bordering several of these different NATO countries. We've got Romania down here, Bulgaria beneath that. We've got Hungary, Slovakia, Poland, and then Belarus is here, and then Russia. And the only thing that is separating the two, Ukraine, really. Other than Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. Here's another version of this. Ukraine is right here. this chunk of land here. And so it sort of shows you, right? Look, if you are Putin, that's what the map looks like. That's what your board game looks like. You know, it'd be like if the Chinese or the Russians took over Canada and then started working their way up South America and then just started getting like to Mexico. And that's all theirs, right? All part of the Communist Chinese Party. And now they're getting close to Mexico, and the United States is going, hey, hold on a minute. Wait a minute there. Not happy about this, right? And I'm not endorsing Putin. I'm not supporting him. But I'm also not encouraging a global world war over this, okay? And I don't know how that serves American interests. And I'm taking Hawley's perspective on this. Somebody needs to explain that before we jump into this whole thing. All right. And so here is Putin now saying that since that has been happening, since we entered into these agreements that there wasn't going to be this eastward lurch, now there's probably launch pads all over the place. He says we made this agreement, and nevertheless, the U.S. did what they did. They withdrew, and now, he says, the launching pads are in Romania, and they're soon to be in Poland if they're not already there. He says, let's imagine that Ukraine is a NATO member state, and let's say that it initiates a military operation. What should we do then? Should we fight against the entire NATO bloc? Huh? Does anyone think at least something about that? Do they just think? Apparently not. Anybody think about this? If they join NATO and Ukraine initiates something, now it's Russia versus NATO. And you can see how that's a tripwire, right? You're sort of setting this up so that if anything goes wrong, oh, Russia attacked a NATO member. Oh, now that justifies a global world war. Oh, yeah. And you get everybody, the Democrats currently in charge, going to be joined by most of the Republicans, say, oh, gotta go defend our NATO allies. Why? Don't know. Here is more Putin. Let's see where this goes. He says, I don't think that the U.S. really cares all that much about Ukrainian safety. And I mean, can you even argue at this point, right? After the U.S. says, well, we care about Afghanistan safety. Ukraine is going to take the word? Really? Here's what he says. But I believe that the U.S., for example, does not care much about Ukraine's safety. They probably give it a thought in the background, but their main task is to contain Russia's development. That is the problem. In this context, Ukraine is just a tool to reach this goal. It can be reached by various means. They can draw us into a military conflict and making their European allies impose against us those tough sanctions that the U.S. is talking about today, military or sanctions. If one wants to avoid such a negative scenario, he says, and we do want to avoid it, then one needs to truly respect the interests of every country, including Russia, and try and find solutions. I hope that we, talking with Ukraine, will continue. We agree with the French president, Emmanuel Macron, that he would probably come to Moscow in the near future, and we're going to discuss those issues with him. I hope that in the end, we will find the solution. So that's from him. Okay, we've heard from our president. We've heard from him, the Russian president. And so right, you can make your own decisions about what is happening here. But regardless, right, people are on high alert over there in Europe. UK Prime Minister Johnson, who's himself going through a little bit of a turbulent time over there, he happened to like to party while he was locking everybody else down. Can't do that. But anyways, that's an aside. Johnson tells Russia's Putin that a Ukraine incursion would be a tragic miscalculation. And so this also came out today, February 2nd. Prime Minister Boris Johnson, they had a call on Wednesday. Prime Minister expressed his deep concern about Russia's current hostile activity. He emphasized the need to find a way forward which respects both Ukraine's territorial integrity and the right to self-defense. Prime Minister stressed that any further Russian incursion into Ukrainian territory would be a tragic miscalculation. Okay, now that's coming from Boris Johnson. Now, they had a phone call today, and it sounds like Mr. Boris is like talking like he's got, some fortitude. saying, listen, right to self-defense, territorial integrity, going to be a tragic miscalculation, right? They needed some stupid headline for the papers. And do you know what Putin did? Probably right as they were having that meeting on that phone call. He pressed a button and he said, why don't you scramble 4 Russian military jets? Why don't you just fly them right over Boris Johnson's head? I don't know really where they flew, but he did that. And so the UK freaked out and they scrambled jets on February 2nd to intercept 4 Russian military planes. British Royal Air Force said Wednesday that it scrambled fighter jets in response to 4 military aircraft from Russia approaching the UK. Forces said 4 Russian strategic bombers were intercepted and escorted out. Putin just doesn't play around. He knows he's playing with children. They have this call. He knows he's going to get scolded by the UK Prime Minister. And so he sends 4 strategic bombers into their airspace, saying that didn't actually enter the UK airspace at any point, but he's going to be flying them nearby. Authorities did not provide any further details on the operation. So he is literally screwing with them, like screwing with these different leaders and these different military apparatus. It's just a wild thing that's happening. But folks, look, even though Putin and Russia are sort of like playing with a mouse like a cat, is what it feels like, really. I think he's outthought all of these people many times over. And he's playing with them like a cat plays with a mouse, just sort of pawing at them, just like laughing at them. But the good news is, fortunately, the United States military leadership team is back in charge, and that orange Cheeto person is no longer there. The adults are back here, and you can see them. Here is a photograph from the Situation Room, where you can see a lot of these very smart people. Of course, Joe Biden, the president, in the Situation Room. I think this is when they were talking about Afghanistan. And you can just go around the room. You can see these very smart people. We've got Lloyd Austin, Secretary of Defense, masked up. Only one, I think. I don't think he has his face shield on in this one. We've got Blinken over here, who botched the Afghanistan situation. That's Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor. He went to Oxford. He's there. Good. He's smart. And then there's Milley back there, who is also masked up. So the point is, we're going to be spending some time talking about a meeting that took place in the Situation Room, something that looked very much like this. And the problem with all of this, of course, is that there were notes taken, and the leaked notes detail the colossal failure of the Biden administration. And here is what the scoop says from Jonathan Swan over from Axios. Says that leaked notes from a White House Situation Room that was from a meeting the day before Kabul fell. The day before. We're going to spend some time going through this timeline. Sheds new light on just how unprepared the Biden administration was to evacuate Afghan nationals who'd helped the U.S. in the last 20 years. Right? And it's not just going to be Afghan nationals. We're talking about U.S. citizens. Why it matters. Hours before the Taliban seized control of the Capitol on August 15th, senior Biden officials were still discussing and assigning basic actions involved in a mass civilian evacuation. Outsiders were frustrated. While the word immediately peppers the document, it's clear officials were still scrambling to finalize their plans on the afternoon of August 14th, the day before Kabul fell. For example, they just decided to notify the local Afghan staff to begin to register their interest in relocation in the United States. Oh, it's just horrible. People are dead because of this. Now, and they are still determining which countries could serve as transit points for evacuees. All right. So what are we talking about? We have notes, right? You've ever been on a board meeting or a minute? Somebody says, can you take minutes of what's happening here? And they say, yeah, Susie got up for more coffee. Susie has a new idea. Susie doesn't like that idea. You get the point of this thing. That is kind of happening in these meeting notes that we're about to go through. But it's going to be useless if we just say, well, this took place on August 14th last year. You don't really remember what was taking place back then. At least I didn't. And so I wanted to reassemble this for us briefly to put some context around this leak. Here we can see over from the New Statesman, they give us a timeline on the Afghanistan catastrophe, and they tell us that on April 14th, 2021, President Joe Biden, the newly elected inaugurated president, is now announcing all troops gone by Afghanistan by September 11th. Remember that stupid anniversary? So he did that in April. Then in May, Taliban launches its first offensive because they go, oh, those idiots, they're leaving in September 11th. All right, well, we'll just go ahead and take over. And so they start mulling into the Helmand province. July 2nd comes. U.S. quietly withdraws soldier from Bagram Air Base, the main military base throughout the war. Just give that up July 2nd. August 13th now, we're getting real close to when this meeting happens. Kandahar, Afghan's second largest city, falls to the Taliban. All right, so let's put this in context. After the second city falls to the Taliban, these knuckleheads get together like, oh my goodness, we better have a meeting about this. Well, shouldn't we? Okay, round everybody up, set it for 4:30. Let's get some food ordered, and we got to talk through this. August 14th, Biden comes out, puts out a statement saying we're sending 5,000 troops back into Afghanistan to help with the evacuation. Reaffirms the desire to leave the region. We're leaving after we're going back in. Then on August 15th, the day after the meeting we're about to look at, Kabul is seized by the Taliban. Afghan President Ghani leaves the country. U.S. embassy is evacuated, okay? The day after. All right, this is what we saw on August 12th from the U.S. embassy. So 2 days before this meeting, we get this. Security alert out of the Kabul embassy in Afghanistan. It says the U.S. Embassy urges citizens to leave immediately, and you better use available commercial flight options. Okay. And we just went through the timeline, right? So we know that Kandahar falls the next day. Afghanistan the second biggest city falls the next day. Their military base is already gone. Second biggest one, right? Outside of Kabul. If you can't afford, file for a loan, get a repatriation loan. We'll get it approved for you. Given the security, please review our documents, travel advisories, increasing violence, blah, 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 right? Absolutely just detached from reality, not even remotely connected to anything. Because obviously we see Kandahar falls literally the next day. So they're like marching into Afghanistan. So then let's actually get to the meeting documents. Okay, so this is what we have now. You can see kind of a sloppy copy here. We have unclassified National Security Council, Washington, D.C. Ooh. This is a summary of conclusions for meetings of the deputies' small group, okay? So it's like meeting minutes. Somebody's wrapping all this up. Put it in a memo and send it out to everybody. Location, White House Situation Room, just like the photograph we saw previously. Time, 3:30 to 4:30. They only have about an hour or so. They've got other business to attend to. And also their wives like them home by 5. Okay, so we can squeeze it in. Set it. Subject, the summary of conclusions for the DSG meeting on relocations out of Afghanistan. 1 hour. Here's what we talked about. Let's get to some conclusions. And so we know on August 12th, you better leave. On August 14th, they have a meeting. On August 16th, 2 days there later, this was literally the scene at the Kabul airport. All right, here's what we've got. Remember this? This is the State Department. This is the U.S. Air Force. Remember this? Okay, so August 16th that happens, and then the New York Times reports this, says Taliban capture Kabul, stunning the U.S. as a 20-year effort unravels in days. Gone. Days. They roll in, they take control of the tower, or of the government center, where, their White House, whatever. They seize total control of it. First things they do is they just start pumping iron. You want to stay in shape so that you can make sure that you beat the infidels. This is outstanding. They're in trouble. The United States is in trouble, folks. Oh my gosh. All right. The point of that, of course, the Taliban's already set up. They're working out. They're already pumping iron, baby. They're on a nutrition plan. They have a country to run. And they got to look good while they're doing it. And so meanwhile, the State Department back in Washington, they're having meetings about evacuating American citizens. Here's what it looked like. You can see August 14th is when they're sitting around a situation room. It kind of looks like this, right? Here is when, this is the situation room scene when Hillary and Obama were in charge. Obama was president back then. Hillary was Secretary of State, and Biden was a little bit more cognizant over there. This is when there were some other leaders in charge. The Situation Room, okay? It's the same scene. And so we have to use our imagination. We got to use our imagination, that's the word, to recreate the table. Here, we can see the participants are being listed from our meeting notes. We've got Chair Liz Sherwood Randall. She's the only person that we're going to be able to identify. And this is what she looks like. We're going to learn a little bit more about her because very highly educated person. We also can see that we have redacted names for other people. The Department of Homeland Security, don't know who the deputies are. I'm sure you could piece that back together. TSA, who else do we have? DNI, CIA is there. We've got the DOD, I'm sure that's Austin and co. We've got Secretary of State and the DOJ, right? Nobody there from the DOJ. Nobody's there from the Health and Human Services, CDC, etc. So it's kind of as a need to know basis, right? You're there. Now, the whole thing is being run by Liz Sherwood Randall. That's this woman, Elizabeth Sherwood Randall, somebody born 1959. She was the assistant president for Homeland Security for Joe Biden. She left January, served on the National Security Council. Okay, yeah, President Barack Obama, President Joe Biden assumed office. She's still the 11th United States Homeland Security Advisor as of current. Now, you'll notice that she went to Harvard, of course, as many of these people do. And so rest assured that they know what they're doing. We see here other people, FBI classified, NSC staff that is classified or redacted. We can't see who exactly was there, but we do have some bullet points and we know a little bit more about what they talked about. So we have this entire group of people, right? All of those are names, like gigantic, that's probably 1, 2, 3 people, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, a lot of people. They're all sitting around talking about this. And we finally get some conclusions. It says it was agreed that, number 1, the deputies agreed on the priority given to U.S. Embassy personnel, U.S. citizens, and allied personnel with whom the U.S. government has agreements for evacuation. So on August 14th, they have finally agreed upon priority, U.S. Embassy personnel, U.S. citizens. Great news. That's good because the Taliban falls tomorrow, so hopefully they can get them out in time. Deputies agreed on August 14th that the following individuals and their families are going to be relocated as soon as possible directly to the United States. Okay, so they've got a plan now. So they're sitting around saying, all right, so we got like a couple 100,000 people we got to think about. Who do we want to get out of here first? They start assembling a list on August 14th. Deputies agreed the following individuals will be relocated as soon as possible. U.S. citizens. Oh, good. Who are living in Afghanistan and their family members. That's good. So they got that figured out, got a conclusion of this one day before. U.S. government, direct hires, also U.S. embassy staff, Afghan contract staff. We've got CIA priority partners are coming out. Afghan special immigrant visas, they're all coming out. And then we can see pre-departure actions, right? So see, these are the general conclusions. We're going to start pulling people out, and we're going to start pulling them out in this order. It's August stinking 14th, as we can see. All right. Here, before we leave, pre-departure actions, okay? August 14th, pre-departure actions are now being discussed at this meeting. The Department of State will immediately stand up a communications manifest team, which will be responsible for notifying individuals from various priority lists of their travel eligibility, and they're going to collect their information for all travelers. So who's going to do that? The Department of State, Anthony Blinken here. He's always joined, of course, as we know, by Ned. And so these two are going to put this thing together across all categories. They're going to say that we're going to begin relocating nuclear family units here. Deputies are going to consider whether additional families can be included. They're going to liaison with the DOD. Outbound flights, eligible travelers are going to begin to depart Kabul on August 15, 2021. State Department needs to get on that immediately. Kabul fell that day. We had the New York Times reporting it on the 16th. DOD, in coordination with the state task force, they're going to try to move 5,000 people out per day. all departments and agencies are going to transmit their list of priority populations for relocation immediately. Okay, do you see this? On August 15th, the day before Kabul falls, all departments and agencies are going to transmit their list of priority populations to be considered for relocation. Right? So they weren't even like they didn't even send the spreadsheets to each other. Nobody even just decided to share the link so they can start to consolidate these things until the 14th. DOD, we can see the DOD is the Department of Defense. This guy, Lloyd Austin, seen here, him and this guy, John Kirby, they're going to contact their partners who are eligible for these programs and notify them of their eligibility. So we'll send a message out. Yeah, we can send an email out. State is going to work to identify as many countries as possible to serve as transit points. Okay, so we've got Blinken and Ned now working overtime. Where can we drop these people off? On August 14th, the day before the city falls. Transit points need to be able to accommodate U.S. citizens, Afghan nationals, other evacuees, U.S. citizens in third world countries, etc. Afghan allies at risk and other Afghan nationals, they might have to remain temporarily until we get the other people out. The National Security Council is going to be creating more policies. Embassy will notify about their interest in relocation about certain individuals. And then after they leave, post-departure actions, this is the last part of this letter, says that the state and the Department of Defense will begin planning transit processing for evacuees after departure from Kabul. Medical screening, concerned about COVID. State Department and the DOD, they're going to coordinate manifests for onwards travel to the continental United States. So they're literally like building the assembly line of what's going to happen with the Afghan evacuees bit by bit. They're doing it in this meeting. You find out who needs to go. You find out, state, where they should land. Once they land, then state and DOD, they're going to coordinate manifests. We're going to do some additional screening. The NSC staff is going to chair a small group discussion to explore ways to talk to Canada and other third world countries about taking these people in. Relevant departments and agencies will continuously work, and we're going to continue to work together. Right? On August 14th, scraping all of this together. Now, of course, there's going to be a lot of questions about this, as there should. And since the Democrats are largely in control of the government, a lot of this is going to happen behind closed doors. Josh Hawley, though, was behind those doors, and he had something to share with us from his experience when he was there. Now, after this, we're jumping to your questions, super chats, and locals comments. So get those ready. Here is Hawley.
Prepared. I did. Let me get John up on you here. Yeah. There we are. I did see the memo.
The memo we just read.
Well, I mean, the first thing is that we, as ever with this administration, we learn more from reading leaks in the press than we ever do from listening to these guys. And by the way, the fact that this hearing is happening behind closed doors is absolutely outrageous. It is a total travesty, and it's for one reason only. They do not want to have any accountability. They do not want to answer questions in public. Do you know General Milley and company still have not responded to my questions for the record following our last hearing in September? In September, they still have not replied.
Yeah.
Why? Because those answers might become public. They don't want to answer any questions in public. This is a joke. This is not oversight. It is a joke. And now as this administration blunders into war with Ukraine, guess what they're going to do tomorrow? Brief us on Ukraine. How? Behind closed doors, because they don't want you asking any questions.
Yep.
They don't want the American people seeing their answers. They don't want to be accountable for anything. This is the most disastrous administration for American foreign policy since the Vietnam War. And
It's true. It's pretty bad. Yeah, it's pretty bad. That is for sure. And so that was Josh Hawley, and many other people are sort of scratching their heads over this whole thing, wondering exactly what is going on. Let's see what you have to say about this from our friends over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. I know there's some comments down here. Let's do a refresh on this. While that is warming up, let's see what's happening on YouTube. We've got Barry Cream, yes please, says kind of insane how this is happening because Joe Biden let Russia complete Nord Stream 2. Yeah, I would suspect that there's a lot more behind the scenes on this. They sort of couch these issues in the most simplest of terms for us peasants and plebes who can have difficult times thinking through complex issues. And so they just say it's about liberty and freedom and democracy and independence and all that crap. In reality, right, I think it has probably a lot more to do with some economic issues, some currency issues, some sort of, trade issues. Money is probably really what's behind a lot of this. And it's hard to decipher what that, really what's happening there. So it's a great comment. Barry Cream, yes, please. And I appreciate that support. Kareem says, on a more positive note, I was downtown today to support the protest in Ottawa. We're probably going back to truckers tomorrow, or at least another video about them. I saw some ridiculous headline today, like literally. If I would have seen this earlier, the whole show may have been about truckers today. But I saw some headline. Somebody in Canada is saying, in Ottawa, is saying that they may have to bring the military in to remove the truckers. So I thought I saw that, Kareem. I got to look into that. I saw the headline like right before we started the show. He says, I know Viva was here too. Had I seen him, I would have spoken to him and told him you said hi. I was probably within a few hundred feet from him. Well, that's awesome, Kareem. I mean, if you do see him, give him a shout out. Of course, I'd love to meet him one day, and all the other people out there who we have talked with, right? Like I've talked to Viva several times, but we've never met. Although that's kind of the norm these days, isn't it? So anyways, look, I'm so grateful that there are so many people who are interested in that story, because I absolutely just love what is happening there. And so I think we may have to do a follow-up on that. I know they're still out there, man, and it's starting to heat up a little bit. Not the weather, but you know what I mean. We have Tammy LeMasters with no question, but a very nice super chat. Thank you, Tammy. I appreciate you there. Evie Warner says Howley needs to begin his response to those comments with how if you dare for accusing me of being a mouthpiece for Russia. I see what you say. Yeah, so Evie is saying that Howley should just go back and just give it right back to Psaki. What did you say? You're calling me a Russian mouthpiece? Maybe he will. He's pretty aggressive. We have TKUA says, if we should stay out of Ukraine, that we should stop sending money and missiles to Israel as well. Is racial politics a part of military assistance? I don't know. You have to ask Whoopi about that one. She is the resident Jew race person. She knows everything, apparently. She's pretty adamant about it. And she's facing the consequences for that. So I don't know how it works, TKUA. I mean, I think that the U.S. foreign policy is pretty screwed up in general. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of U.S. citizens are forgotten as all of the massive, military companies just continue to enrich themselves. Let's see what else we've got over from locals here. This is warmed up. Monster One says, honk, honk. From Monster One, we have former LEO says, Rob, now that Biden has committed the American military to another conflict, which places lives in jeopardy, is he going to contact Dick Cheney, or do I mean Dick, on a plan to win, or is there going to be another Afghanistan? The Cheney family has experience on how to spend American lives with no return. Is another Cheney, Liz, going to be planning to make a profit, or are they going to be bring back Dick to shed more American blood? Just look at the fine job that was done by the Biden's DOD and JCOS in getting us out in front of Cheney's war in Afghanistan. Former, it sounds like you're also tired of the endless wars, and I cannot blame you a bit for that. I'm Not Gas says, I think this is all saber rattling from the U.S. and the U.S. media, priming the public and manufacturing consent for intervention when a, quote, border incident pops up, likely a false flag initiated by intelligence assets similar to the white helmets and the fake Assad gassing situation. Well, I think I'm Not Gas. I mean, are you saying that might be something that would be initiated by the Russians or by the allies, right? By NATO or somebody in Ukraine or somebody who's just a third party who just wants to see a war and wants to sell missiles to both sides? Who knows, right? Yeah, there's a lot of people would get very rich if there was a global world war. And so maybe it's both sides, or just hey, no, we don't want anything to happen here. But you have somebody like, I don't know, maybe somebody who would be very, very benefited if the U.S. was involved in a very complex war in Europe. I don't know, maybe like China. I don't know, just spitballing there. Who knows? Todd Trout says, Rob, our elites are not thinking this through. Ukraine is ethnically Russian. How would we like it if Russia moved troops into Canada because we threatened to invade Canada? I know it's not quite the same, but a lot of people don't realize that old Russian culture started in Kiev. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's probably truth to that. When I was reading about this, Putin, I was looking at sort of the reason why certain countries, get so sort of attached to certain geographic areas, right? And there's multiple layers of this, like, China, Taiwan, Russia, Ukraine, many examples of this. And when I was reading about Putin, there was some depth there about sort of a cultural affinity to that area, right? He sort of, if you go back and read through his history, there's this sort of connection between these geographies and these peoples that is deeper than, just, thoughts of like fake, let's say, what's the word? More or less meaningless words, right? That sound good, but like democracy. Okay. Fight for democracy. What does that even mean in Ukraine? I don't know. But like before we engage in a global world war, we better define what that means and what the purpose of all this is. Miss Lucky says, Rob, from Sergeant Bob, of course, soldiers must and should follow orders, but I would imagine today's soldiers could not have confidence that the, quote, higher ups have any idea what they're doing. After all, the brass had, quote, every contingency planned for in Afghanistan. Under President Trump, they knew he had their backs. Prayers for those who serve. Great comment from Sergeant Bob. I agree with you. I think that a lot of people have a lot of questions about whether this administration is competent at all. Sergeant Bob says, me thinks Ukraine is the shiny red ball. Yeah, we say that a lot here at our law firm, the shiny objects. What's the shiny object out there? Spawn Dog says, hey, maybe the U.S. should call his bluff and put 50 to 100,000 on the Ukrainian border. While he's at it, might as well deploy the same number on our southern border. But nobody cares about our border. Apparently, it's the Ukrainian border that is the border that matters. Thunder 7 says, the entire thing is propaganda. It's to demonize Putin and accuse him of being an aggressor when Russian troops are inside the Russian border and they have no intention of invading Ukraine. They want NATO to not break the agreement to never have Ukraine as part of the little club, where they can place nuclear warheads in Kyiv and they can reach Moscow in 7 minutes. Can you imagine Canada or Mexico placing warheads that could reach Washington in 5 minutes, 7 minutes? Wag the dog to take attention away from the disaster Biden Marxist regime having inflicted on America. Once they realize that Putin is not taking their bait and not moving his troops outside Mother Russia, they will pull back. Hopefully, right? Hopefully this whole thing is just a big exercise in stupidity and everybody just realizes that and goes back to bed. Leafy Bug says your taxes at work, Americans. Gotta help those allies. They spend virtually nothing on their defense. So you need to make up the difference. Why? It's a sacred obligation. You're very important and you have to comply with this. Briggs 57 says, I'm here. Good to see you, Briggs. Kenny 1B says, let's be frank. Josh Hawley doesn't know anything, nor does Peppermint Patty, nor does Blinken. Congressmen, regardless of any party, will try to use the crisis to score political points. Always true. Thunder 7 says, Rob, remember when the fake news and the corrupt Dems kept screaming Trump was going to cause World War III? In fact, Trump, the only president not to invade another country and created peace treaties all over the world. There would be none of this Ukraine, Russia beating of the war of drums, North Korea not firing missiles, and China would not be flying fighter jets over Taiwan. The lunatic left Dems are willing to kill more U.S. military in their never-ending quest to paint Putin as a warmonger. It's all true. I think that's all true. Kenny 1B says, Russia violated the nuclear missile treaty, then accuses the U.S. of withdrawing for no reason. Typical Russian denial and deception tactic from Kenny 1B. Miss Lucky and Sergeant Bob say, Sleepy Joe F-, KGB Putin A+. Jen Psaki disqualified due to truthfulness issues. Not that I support Putin. You don't have to support, look, you don't have to support Putin to sort of appreciate the tactician, right, in a person. That's just common sense. Kenny 1B says, you have to read the NATO treaty itself. It's specific and narrow in scope, and Putin knows that. I'm not saying that he's being intellectually honest in any way, shape, or form. I'm just saying, like, let's listen to his arguments versus Blinken's arguments and see which one, is better. Vientica says, U.S. government is notorious for breaking deals. Besides the guarantee with Russia and NATO, let's not forget the Iran nuclear deal. Richard Medhurst has a video on YouTube about how the U.S. government signed a contract, then tried to market classified to hide. Then, while they were breaking the terms, now the U.S. is trying to guarantee to the UK courts that Assange isn't going to be put in a Sam's Ultramax prison. Pretty much everyone the world over knows, don't trust the U.S. government. It's good advice. It's just good advice. Yeah. Why would you trust the government? You think they serve you? You think they care about you? They do not. Look around. They don't. We have Kenny 1B says, here's the NATO treaty itself. Let's read Article 5 and compare it to Putin's statement. All right, it's a short article. Let's read it real quick. Here it is. Article 5 says the parties agree that an armed attack against one or more of them in Europe or North America shall be considered an attack against all of them. And they all agree, if such an armed attack occurs, each of them, in exercise of the right, will assist the parties so attacked in concert with the others, including the use of... Okay, so if one person's attacked, they're all attacked, and they're all going to agree to defend each other. Any such armed attack and all measures taken as a result shall immediately be reported to the Security Council. Such measures shall be terminated when the Security Council has taken the measures necessary to restore and maintain international peace and security. All right, so what's the context of this? 1940. All right, I'm going to have to dig into this deeper there, but thank you for that link. So I did read it. That was from, what did I do with all this? That was from Kenny 1B. And so we just read it. You can compare and contrast that puppy with what Putin said. Radice says, Rob, I was upset the first time my gym workout was put on national TV. Why did you have to play it again? I haven't been able to get a wax since COVID hit. It's China's fault. Great show. Oh, that was the Taliban. They're commenting from the gym over there in Kabul. Captain Jim says, hey, Rob, this kind of press conference is what Putin is masterful at. This is what has kept his ratings up for 20 years. He's good at it. Yeah, I mean, he is good at it. Although not so much lately because of all the domestic problems piling up. And to be fair, the guys running Russia right now are thugs. So you can't blame the West not being too keen to negotiate with them. No, look. Yeah, and I didn't mean to sort of say that I endorse them at all. That's not what I'm implying at all, right? They're anti-democratic, totalitarian maniacs, and they put people in prison for all sorts of insane things. I mean, look at Navalny and many of these other, like, they're monsters, right? They're terrible people. But at the same time, you got to recognize that, and you got to play on the world stage like you're playing with the big boys. Okay, okay, good Lord. Anthony Blinken sits down with the Chinese, and he's like, well, your human rights records is pretty problematic. And they say, what did you say to us, you little pipsqueak? Look what's happening in your cities, moron. And so, like, it's just, it's outclassed. I think what I'm sensing is the U.S. current government is just outclassed by other people who are bad people, but have better skill sets because they're actually operating in reality. You know, Blinken and Sullivan and Austin and Milley and many of these people, right? It's the multiple pronouns versus multiple attack assault vehicles. Like, which one is going to win in this battle? And it's pretty obvious. And it feels like they're outclassed is basically all I can say about it. Let's see what else. Anything else coming in before we wrap it up for the day? We have some others here on locals. Monster One says, is it just me, or does Hawley look like Nicolas Cage? I think so. I can see it for sure. Leafy Bug says, for Millie, Russia is personal. He's heard there's some white rage happening over there, and he needs some extra understanding from him. We have Vice HVAC me. Hopefully I didn't say something bad. In my lifetime, we have been working on developing a reputation of dumping those that trust us. We did this in Vietnam and the Middle East. I thought we also had a commitment to Ukraine. Nice thing about this site is if I'm wrong, someone will correct me. That's from Vice. I think it's an HVAC individual. Welcome to the community. Briggs57 says, I heard the heavy tow truck drivers all called in sick with COVID. Well, they better just stay put then until they're quarantined and rested up. Former LEO says, can you say Blackwater and the billions of dollars that went to Cheney? Vientikis is sharing endthedamnwars.org. Let's see what this site is. Check that out. Endthedamnwars.com. C. Reed says, I still think my gif of Jen Psaki looks better. Let's see here, this one. Next question, Peter. Oh, is that Jen? It kind of looks like her. It kind of has that same hair color and the same tone. Yeah. I think that's basically, maybe that was her as a younger person. I'm not sure about that. We had a couple others from YouTube come on in. We have Legalize Freedom is here, says Afghanistan. Hillary says, what difference does it make, while violently shaking her fists? Yeah, remember that? That was the embassy in, where was that? Hillary Clinton embassy. What was that one? Oh, it's at the tip of my tongue. Hillary Clinton embassy. Somebody in the chat have that? Well, what? Benghazi. That's it. Benghazi. The Benghazi attacks, 2012. That was the one that she botched, right? So the Democrats just have sort of a bad track record with the embassy protection situation. And so the Benghazi attacks, that came in from Legalize Freedom. And John with a super chat says, love the info, Rob. God bless. Free honk honk. And so we're going to come back probably to the truckers soon enough, because I'm hearing that there was a headline. Canadian trucker, let's see this. Canadian trucker military removal. Let's see if there's an article here. Ottawa police considering military intervention. Look at this garbage. All right. This just came out. I saw this earlier today. Here. Ottawa police considering a military intervention to ending the unlawful blockade. Let's zoom this puppy up. Police in Ottawa warned they may have to call in the military to disband unlawful protests in the nation's capital. Police Chief Peter Slawley warned on Wednesday officers did not have the resources to help. He said he warned bringing the military in carried a massive risk, adding that protesters are believed to have weapons. We do not want riots, but all the options remain on the table, he said. The police chief said that, quote, a significant element in the United States was involved. GoFundMe's got 7.9 million. Officials expect more protesters over the weekend and described the situation to be volatile. Residents getting frustrated. Protesters released a statement saying we sympathize with residents. Senior lawmakers have, so it's heating up over there. And, look, all right, so that just makes my blood boil right there. So, all right, so we're going to probably have to come back to that tomorrow because I want to support that effort in any way that we humanly can. And that came in from John. So we'll talk about that tomorrow, John. Let's do a quick refresh here on locals before we wrap it up for the day and welcome some new people who joined our tremendous community. Kenny 1B says, NATO Article 5 references the UN Security Council Article 51 about a non-provoked attack. Okay, so I'll have to think about that in context. Yeah, and Leafy Bug with the last one says, it looks to me as though Western leaders have no understanding of how totally unenthused their populations are over the prospect of entering into a full-scale war. And I agree with that. I think people are just tired of it. And people can sort of see things with a much clearer lens these days. Rewind the clock 20 years, right? They may have been able to cover up the catastrophe in Afghanistan. Who knows? Would you have been able to see all the social media videos with somebody, filming people falling out of airplanes in the middle of the sky? I'm not sure. Not sure if anybody would have cut that. But now we do. And so now people's appetite for war is slowly evaporating away, as it should, because it's a horrible thing. And I want to welcome some new people who joined our community. Big shout outs before we get out of here to C. Reed. Welcome. And there are 5 E's on this one. I counted all of them. Let's double check that. Yep, there's 5. Dante Picante is here. Welcome. True Blue Trucker signed up. Welcome, True Blue. We've got It's All Alleys here, along with Short Time Here, Richard's The Real. We've got Lovely Gemini, Wonder Girl. We've got C. Jones, John, One Tough Chick, Frank MC42, Ion Energy, Wild Child, Alaskan for Trump, AZ Grayman and Mr. Shields are in the house. YouTube shout outs. We've got Mr. J Bug joined the shout out member level, along with Blue Bunny. And of course, we've got new member perk gifts. We've got one more that we can add. And so I'm open to suggestions about what number 9 will be. And if we keep going, we're eventually going to get up to number 10. We need more members. And so if you want to join up, you get some cool stuff. You get a badge. You get a, so I can also do this thing where I can pre-release videos only to members only for a little bit. And so it's just, it's just horrible to do that. But, what can you do? You just got to do it. But they're all going to come out eventually public, but I can release stuff to only members first. And so I might be a jerk about that in the future. We'll see. I'm having fun with it. And so I want to invite you to come and check us out. Join us here on Locals at watchingthewatchers.locals.com, or join us at the YouTube membership community, because we're doing some fun stuff there too. And that, my friends, is it for us for the day. I want to thank you for being a part of the show. It's a lot of fun, great questions. I learn a lot, and I look forward to it every day. So I will be back here, hopefully with you tomorrow, same time, same place, 4 p.m. Arizona time, 5 p.m. Mountain, 6 p.m. on the East Coast. And for that one Florida man, everybody else have a tremendous evening. Sleep very well. I'll see you right back here tomorrow. Bye-bye.